Welcome back to Be the Change podcast with me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of Diversity NL. Have a listen as we explore real life, vulnerable topics on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Become awakened, create culture of inclusion, be brave, have impact by being an ally. Explore how you can be the change that you always wanted to be. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Uktamaguk as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We'd like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatukavut, and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We open our hearts and minds as we strive for respectful relationships with all First Peoples of this province. We search for collective healing and true reconciliation as we honor this beautiful land together and commit ourselves to being stewards who will respect the cultures, traditions, and ceremonies of all who call it home. Welcome back, everyone, to Be the Change podcast. I have a very special guest today, Senator Judy White. How fantastic. It's been a while since we've been trying to book in, because you're very busy, by the way, and doing amazing. So you've had an upgrade in title since we would have connected in, which is brilliant, amazing. I couldn't be happier for you. Be now a senator with the Government of Canada. So you are a member of the Flat Bay Band. You're Mi'kmaq. You're also a King's Counsel lawyer with the significant experience in human rights issues, Indigenous governments, and legislative matters. And you were previously our Assistant Deputy Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation, the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. I understand you have a brilliant history. I want to get into some of that and get into a little bit about your story. Tell us a little bit about your story. How did you start off? Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm really honored and pleased here. And I have to say from the outset, I stand on the shoulders of many people. I've had a very privileged life. And as a Mi'kmaq woman, I am really proud that we've arrived in this place in this country where we as Indigenous people can tell our stories, and we are finding acceptance to share those stories. So thank you for this opportunity to share my story. My story is very Judy in the sense that I think we're all unique as women, gender diverse, and people. I grew up in a very small community. I was Indian when Indian wasn't cool, and we lived our life, in Flat Bay in a very Mi'kmaq traditional community, and we didn't get up each morning and say, this is a Mi'kmaq thing and we're doing it. We just lived our life as Mi'kmaq, and so I was very privileged. I had the grounding. I think that has helped me throughout my personal and professional career.
Absolutely. So at what age did you think, I want to make a difference? Because you truly are making a difference. I think, for young women and gender diverse, seeing you within government, seeing you within, having your law degree, seeing you within, the powerful roles and the different voices and different tables you get to sit at, how did that come about? Like, have you always been an advocate?
I don't know if I actually called it advocacy at the point. I can share that I grew up with the belief that we were all gifted, that we were. So I had this level of arrogance, confidence that, it was just part of our community upbringing. It was the way it was. So, that's how I approached anything I did. So I knew that, we were a gift. We were placed on this earth to participate in life, and that, life is not fair. I knew that from a very young age, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that you need to be able to move forward and always, participate in life as best you can. We all have different challenges, but again, I was gifted in the sense that I understood that, we all come, with beautiful minds. We all have the ability to pray. We have the ability to change, and we have the ability to accept. So with those principles in mind, I pursued anything and everything with the understanding that I can do this, and that change is part of who we are. And the key is how to accept change. So at a very young age, change was constant, and change was something that we were all a part of. But as to actually the decision to go to law school, that was a deliberate choice. That was a decision, because every injustice done to Indigenous people has been done through law and policy. So my belief was, in order to help affect change, you have to get in to those tools. And it's so funny because my grandfather, who is, who's passed on to the spirit world, but he always said, Judy, I was so afraid you were going to be a politician, and now it's worse, you became a lawyer.
So what would you think? Now you're a senator. What would you think about that?
He was my biggest fan, but he always reminded me to stay humble and to remember where I come from, because I think that was one of the greatest gifts that he provided us, is that you have to know who you are in order to know where you're going.
Absolutely. So what's next, Senator?
Well,
right?
I have to say I'm thrilled. I just got appointed on July 6th, so I'm still in awe. I just got back. I spent a week in Ottawa in the Senate chambers and selected my office, and it was just so surreal, Stephanie. I've been walking on air because I know now that I have an opportunity to affect real change. So, I'm excited. So how I'm going to start, there's 16 various committees, and I guess most of the work of the Senate is done through committees. So I'm not going to get on any particular committee at this juncture. I'm actually going to do akin to an audit of a university course. I'm going to go in and visit and sit around the discussions of every committee. So I won't be allowed to vote, and I won't be allowed to make a motion, but I can still participate in the discussions. And then once I do this, of course, I've been kind of warned, well, that may take some time. And I'm like, I have 15 years. I'd like to take the time at the front, like I don't need to be on committee today. And of course, because I'm a proud Mi'kmaq woman, the first thing is, well, you can sit on the Indigenous committee. And I'm like, no, the Indigenous committee, we have a lot of strong advocates there. I'd like to spread, the Indigenous knowledge on other committees. So that's basically where I am right now as it relates to, we come back on the 18th of September in the Senate chambers. And it's just I was so awestruck when I walked in the red chamber, and, the clerk was showing me, how I will be doing the swearing in ceremony. And I was just like, you know what, this is a pivotal moment for Judy White in particular, but certainly for my community and for Mi'kmaq people and for Indigenous people in Newfoundland and Labrador, because I'm the first Indigenous senator from our province, the last province to appoint an Indigenous senator, by the way.
Sounds like it was well over time. What do you think? Absolutely.
Oh, I think so. But I have to say, I always strive for positivity. So the easy thing to say is what was done wrong, but it's done right. And that's what we have to do. So I acknowledge that.
Absolutely. For sure. I mean, it's all about moving forward, I would think, and looking at how we can each do change and be change makers. And I see you as a pivotal person in that, especially for a beautiful province of Newfoundland and Labrador, how we move forward for Indigenous peoples and for all peoples, and how we start looking at change within our system, within our government. And I see you as one of those inclusive leaders, in having the privilege in this space. And it truly is, I think, a privilege for those of us who get to share space and tables. And certainly, you'll be at the Prime Minister's table and looking at what that looks like. So that's very powerful. So I wish you a whole lot of luck when it comes to that and success. And I look forward to following your career as it goes on.
Thank you. And I'm really hoping that I can make the Senate more accessible in the sense of people understanding what it is. The perception is, and I have to say, for a long time, I probably subscribed to the same view, that it's old white men, retired politicians up there sitting around, collecting a paycheck. And I think, that was a perception. I certainly learned over the years before my appointment that that's not the case. So, one of the first things I will be doing is reaching out to the schools in Newfoundland and Labrador and offering to, make a presentation. And the Senate, what I found out last week, has a wealth of resources for schools, for universities, and so I plan to use the tools that they have in place to be more accessible. And I'm hoping that I can get, one of the media supporters to say, every 3 months or every 6 months, check in. Okay, so what's happening at the Senate with Judy White now, So I'd like to be able to share that, because I think awareness is what helps people understand. And I like hearing from Canadians. Like, already I have people all across the country reaching out and saying, this bill is coming, you need to know this. And even though I don't even know what this bill is yet, just for the record, I like the fact that people can reach out, and I read everything. So I certainly encourage people to send me their opinions. Doesn't mean I agree with you, but I like the fact that we live in a world where people can say what they feel, and people like me will listen.
Absolutely. I mean, so engaging, that's tremendous. Actually, I think about, some of the schools in Newfoundland and Labrador, and especially some of our rural communities, not having access to see like what this would look like, what an impact this could have on everyone. Like, just truly, like, I look forward to seeing that myself, actually, because, like, we all wonder, I guess, as Canadians, like, how does it work? And what does the Senate do? And what those different pieces of government do? So that would be very fantastic and amazing for us to see, like, or have access to different resources. Amazing.
Yep, absolutely. I certainly will do my utmost to ensure that. And one of the first things I want to do, obviously, is reach out to the Indigenous schools in the province in Labrador and connect. So that's the first thing when I get back in Ottawa on September 18th. So I'm really excited about that. But I guess, your conversation when we were talking about being a change maker, I've never labeled myself. Labels are so difficult. I find we're so quick to label people, and sometimes it's not really fair. So I try not to take the labels because there are so many. But at the same time, words really matter. So that's how I try to affect change, by using words or not using words. So I'll give you an example. Is hate, H-A-T-E, is a word I do not use, even though I just used it. And it's funny, you can ask any of my nieces, my grandchildren, if you say hate, it's a pause. Whoa, 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 whoa. You can detest, you can dislike, you can be not fond of, you can despise, but you can't hate. And it came to fruition in February. My little granddaughter had a sleepover, which she tricked me into 4 other kids, but that's a different story. So I had a sleepover of 5 10-year-olds, and they were all jumping around, and someone was like, oh, I hate this. And pause for thought. We can't hate, we can dislike, we cannot be fond of, we can despise, but we can't hate. And I think that's those little things that make a difference, because I think that's the only way we're going to affect change, is give back the power to words. Because when you hear a hate crime, nobody really seems to bat an eye, because hate is used so much, and the different stereotypes, she's a girly girl. Oh, when I hear a parent saying she's a girly girl, I just want to say, hold on, like, why is she a girly girl? Like, why use that term? She's an expressive female. Great. She's so blonde, here comes a woman driver. So it's those ways to affect change. And I guess my every time I speak publicly to a high school or a university, I talk about words, and I talk about how we don't realize the impact that our words have. And I always use the example that the Sisters of Mercy, although I never thought they were merciful when they taught me, but use was a little white lie. Oh, it's okay. It's a little white lie. And as an Indigenous girl in the class, like, white people are so privileged that even their lies are okay, because they're white. A little white lie is okay lie. And it that really resonates with a lot of particularly, high school students and younger students. So that's how I like to affect change. I'm not going in for the big grandiose, pass this law and the world is going to be great. But I think the way we speak and the way we interact and the words we use, because words matter, and we should remember that.
Absolutely. Language is massively important. There's so many different things that I've tried and am working actively on taking out of my vocabulary. Ladies and gentlemen, guys,
Exactly.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Previous places I worked, like they would use powwow for a meeting.
And
having no understanding of
lowest man on the totem pole,
right? Yeah. So not really having understanding, like rule of thumb, like no understanding of where words come from. So looking at the importance of the way we express ourselves, it's of the utmost importance. And I think not really having that understanding of it does really take away from different cultures and backgrounds and privilege, right?
Absolutely.
Power and privilege.
Absolutely. Power, privilege it is. I guess for me, it's so difficult because our world is so, hung up on ridicule and all that is wrong, negativity. And for me, negativity hurts. Like if I'm in a room with people that are constantly complaining, like it physically hurts because I can't deal with it. And I don't know how to deal with it because I think, life is hard, but that doesn't mean that we have to accept it, hard. I think we have to find a way to deal with it, and the easiest thing is to be angry. Like it's so easy to be angry, and I don't think that it helps us at all. And the more anger we have, the more inequity is fueled. It's not healthy to be so full of anger.
Absolutely. So for you as a leader and for you as, I guess now a member of a Senate, when it talks about leadership, what that kind of means to you and how we put leadership forward in that positive light.
Yeah. In my Indigenous way of knowing, and in my Mi'kmaq way of knowing, leadership is akin to a concept that we have in our community as, being a good relative. So at the very heart of being a good relative is the simple idea of respect, understanding, and providing mutual aid. So you always give back more than you take, and you let the individual define themselves in their own way, in their own time. So, it's hard, as I just indicated, being a good relative in this way, because all we have to do is look at the news and social media, and there's so much negativity and animosity, and in a lot of cases, downright hate. But for me, I'd like to forge more positive relationships. So all this negativity, I always stand up and say, can we reframe this, to add it as a more positive. So that's kind of how I proceed with anything and everything. I start from the concept of being a good relative, and listen to learn, listen to hear. So often we listen to respond, and now trust me, I'm still working on that. But it's something that I'm finding. If I listen openly and listen to hear, sometimes it's much easier to help facilitate a process as opposed to always responding. So I think that's one way to affect good leadership as well.
That's very interesting. It's definitely a non-colonialized way of thinking for sure, and it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
When you break it down into those small pieces. So if we were going to be a good relative, if we were going to be a good friend, if we were going to be a good person, that positivity, like shining light on positivity, because just as negativity can be contagious, positivity can as well. So
absolutely,
we do 99 things right out of 100, and it's that one thing that we kind of linger on, right? We don't celebrate the successes.
Well, yeah, and even like in Indigenous communities, when we talk about trauma and intergenerational trauma, it's often from a deficit or a negative position. It's from that mindset. But in reality, it's the action of unlearning and releasing and changing patterns. So, anyone so brave to tackle the process needs a little bit more positive reframing or a positive mantra. So for us, what we say is not intergenerational trauma is, we are mending our own bundle. So we're grateful for the people that's helping us relearn or reclaim our traditions. And I always say, whenever I get an opportunity to, particularly Indigenous students, is that, we do have a lot of intergenerational trauma. We do need to mend our own bundle, but we have to remember that we have the intergenerational wisdom too. So let's focus on the positivity and move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess in that light, how do you see us moving forward, I guess, as a government, as a province of beautiful Newfoundland and Labrador? Like, how do we move forward and look at, I guess, being that whole inclusive piece that we need to be for folks?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think we need, empathy, obviously. I think as leaders, we need to stop being so reactionary and empathize with people, listen to hear. And I think we have to serve people more positively, because you don't have a place to live doesn't make you a bad person. Because you have mental health issues doesn't make you inferior, So I think our service has to be more from a positivity perspective, is that, and not positivity in the sense, okay, I go help someone and then I put it on Facebook or I put it in social media to say, look how great I am. That's not service, that's opportunist. But to serve people, I think we need to really understand the situation. So, and then I think, the word that we rarely use is love. We really need to have, love as a spirit and place that it's okay to say you love things. We need to love. This should be the norm. It's so easy to hate, so why can't we bring that forward and use love? So I think that's kind of the things that's important for Newfoundland and Labrador. We have to be patient, we have to be persistent, but life is not so much what you accomplish, but what you overcome and how you give it back.
Absolutely. So looking at barriers, because we all come from different lives that we're either born into privilege and some of us not, or different types of privilege, and looking at how we do overcome barriers. Any suggestions on that? Because some people think that all of us are in, I guess, an analogy in Newfoundland, Labrador, all in the same boat. Like, we've heard that before, but we're not. We know that we're not. We all have different barriers. So as women and gender diverse folks, we have different barriers than white cisgender males. It's just is what it is. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but understanding, I guess, perspective and different lenses and different stories. Like, any thoughts on that piece, like barriers that we have to overcome?
Yeah, I think that there's, I think I've said this a couple of times, life is good, but it's not fair. And what happens a lot of times is that we have this delusion that life is supposed to be fair and it's supposed to be, and when we don't, then it's the source of a lot of unhappiness. But really, people, incidents, and experiences, for me, like, come into your life, and some leave, some go out of your life, but you always have to live with yourself. So I think for me, like, I like being pleasant. I like being positive. I say thank you. I open doors for people, and I like being peaceful. And I know that sounds like so simplistic, but it is easy to be kind. But the receiving end it's so much better. So I think we're so angry and reactionary, and I think we have to try to change the conversation and focus on positively. Like, I know there are terrible people out there, and there's some people that you're not going to be able to change, but I know there's lots of great people out there as well. And it's affirmed every day I run into someone or have an experience with or about someone. I like the people that stop and look at the tiny plants that grow on the sidewalk. I like the people that laugh so loud that they snort and then they apologize, and then we laugh harder because you're snorting. I like being around people that compliment each other randomly, and even people that take pictures, although I'm not one of those picture people, but I like that. And, people who ramble on like myself because they're passionate about something, and people who blush, people who stutter, people who are kind, people who are warm, and people who love. That's just how I live and how I like to be surrounded by. And it makes days so much better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do wish the world was full of folks that had your upbeat attitude. I can tell you from working in many different areas and having many different conversations, it would be a lot easier. And I know that's not easy to come by the way, that contagious positivity, because some days are just tougher than others sometimes.
Absolutely.
But I wonder, we talked before we came on here about the way that you start your day. I wonder, might that be helpful? Like if we all started with a grounding?
Well, I always start my day and end my day in a similar fashion. So I start my day with a smudge, with a blessing, and I thank the Creator for what I have to start my day with, the gifts I have, and I have so many. And I don't just mean the house, the roof over my head and the feet, but I have the gift of health. I have the gift of vision. I have the gift of strength, and I have the gift of numerous generations of ancestors behind me. And then I proceed with my day. At the end of the day, I always say a prayer. Like I start, I don't do smudge in the evenings, but I always say a prayer and thank the Creator for the day, reflect on things that went well and things that may not so well. Never beat myself up. I shouldn't have, I did do that for a long time, but I don't do that now because tomorrow's another day. So what didn't happen today, maybe I'll be better prepared to do it tomorrow, and maybe it's not meant to be at all. So that's how I start and finish my day. And it certainly helps. It certainly helps because although I'm very positive and, I've still had trials and tribulations. But again, I think it's how we reflect on them and respond to them and react to them that makes life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. So for some people that may be listening, not understanding what smudge is, can you just break it down a little bit for us?
Sure. So smudge is like a purifying ceremony, and not purifying. So in the sense of, so when I smudge, I will smudge my mouth so I speak good words. I will smudge my eyes so I see good things. I will smudge my ears so I hear that's good. And then I'll smudge my whole body so that I will feel good. And that helps see not only the good in me, but the good in all that I encounter that day. And it's something that I enjoy doing, and something now that I will be doing at the Senate of Canada. So last week, that was one of my requests. And I'm very pleased to say that they were like, okay, how can we do this? And so the mornings when I start my day and I will smudge, they will turn off the smoke detector in my office for that time. So I won't be able to change the time I do the smudging, but that's okay. I think that's a positivity. And I think that shows an openness and a willingness of the Senate of Canada to have Judy White, a Mi'kmaq woman from Flat Bay in the province of Newfoundland, Labrador, there doing her thing.
Absolutely. So I participated in one smudge. And I've been a social worker for some 22 years. And to me, it was the most safest, I don't even know how to describe it. It was a very grounding, very, you can't describe it until you've been through one. It's just one of those very safe spaces. And it felt so good. And I don't even know how to describe it. Like we set off the smoke detectors a couple of times, but it's the most beautiful smell you've ever smelled. Like it's the lemon, the sweet grass, just the sage, everything. It was just, to me, it was just one of those very powerful moments. So I'm very grateful for Empowering Indigenous Women for Stronger Communities, who invited me. And it was just one of those very loving. I felt nothing but love, to be honest, in that room.
And it is, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that's what it is. And I mean, the sweetgrass is a plant that is grown. So we're connecting with nature, which is where we've come from, you know, so it is a beautiful experience, and it's a good way to start the day. And, you know, I would encourage people to start the day, you know, if they don't want to smudge, because I recognize there's some allergies and those kind of things. But if you don't want to smudge, but start with a blessing. If you start your day with positivity, it won't be so bad, the negativity that you encounter throughout the day.
That's true. And if you could do that as a group of people, imagine how that powerful is in teams and in organizations. You start with the blessing, you start with the things or gratitude moment or mindfulness or those sorts of things that kind of help ground you and help your organization celebrate, you know, what's going on, like as people. Like, I mean, it joins us and connects us. That's the whole point of connecting us, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, negativity travels so fast. Imagine if we all start being positive, how fast that would. I think it would change our world where we are anyway.
So if you've ever tried the experiment, which we've tried before, of, you know, you go through like Tim Hortons or Starbucks or whomever's, and you pay for the person's, you know, coffee or teas.
Yeah.
Like it's that kindness thing. You see it thrown out on Facebook. Like, hey, thank you for whoever bought. And then I decided to, and then someone else says, well, I decide.
Exactly.
It's one of those thoughtful kindfulness that, you know, cost you $5 or $6, like something very small. Of course, if you had the affordability to do it.
And of course, kindness costs nothing. So
it does. True.
You know, like, I don't know how many times I just smile at someone when I'm on the street, particularly downtown Ottawa, you know, and you can see they're like confused.
Yeah, you're not in your community now.
Have a great day, you know. Or I love complimenting people on their attire, men and women, and women pause, you know, like, you know, because we're always used to having these sexist remarks or, you know, innuendos about, okay, am I really dressing good or is there something wrong with, you know, but I do it to men too. And it was funny because a lot of people stopped and was like, Judy, you notice everything. So again, instead of taking it as a compliment, is, well, yes, I do. You know, I notice nice things and you look lovely today. Your haircut is beautiful, you know, and it's a nice feeling.
It's true. Like, you know, we walk in a local park here and we're always saying good morning or hello or how are you or look at your dogs, how cute, like, you know, like for those people. And sometimes it depends on who they are, because if it's a visitor, you just kind of see that look of like, do you know how many times we say hello in a run of an hour's walk? Like, it must have been 60 times or more, right? Like it's a constant, right? But we've tried at other places, downtown Toronto and other places. It doesn't exactly land so well.
Exactly.
It's one of those, they're wondering like, what, you know, what's wrong with this person that's saying hello to everyone? It's like, we almost need to put a flag on and saying, hey, we're from Newfoundland and Labrador. We're friendly. We're just trying to connect with people, brighten your day.
Exactly. And it's just the way I am. I love laughter. I love, you know, making a difference in people's lives. And I love making people feel like they're important. And so, yeah, I'm very positive, and I walk in a room like the ancestors opened a door for me and I have a presence.
I'm sure you do. And I'm very grateful for that, by the way. That's fantastic. So when I asked people, who should I talk to next, by the way? And I can't tell you how many times your name came up. It's like, you got to speak to Judy White. You got to speak to Judy White. Now it's, of course, Senator Judy White, but you got to speak to her, because
I'll always be just Judy.
I hear you. But it's just, you know, like your name kept coming up, and I suggest it's for a reason. I think it's because you are quite humble. You know, you're just Judy. You know, not everyone says that, by the way, when you have conversations with folks. Not as humble. They're not as you don't have the gratitude.
I learned that last week at the Senate when the page wanted to carry my briefcase, and I was like, "You're not carrying my briefcase." And they're like, "Oh no, this is what we do." Well, you don't do that for me. I've always carried my briefcase. You know. Now, when I had 10 binders, I was like, "Okay, maybe I should have left them."
What do you think that we're not talking about that we need to talk about?
In terms of us today, or in general?
Like in general in the world, like what are we not talking about that we need to talk about? Because there's some things that we just don't talk about that for whatever reason?
That's an interesting question. You should have gave me some time to reflect on that.
I know. Well, I can give you time to reflect on that one. Actually, we can come back to it. I know it is an interesting one, though.
Yeah, I think, diversity, equity, inclusion, all that you are doing in your organization, Stephanie, are things that we talk about, but we don't actually talk about. You know what I mean? Like we talk about, we need to be doing this, we should be doing this. But how do we do that? How do we change the mindset? How do we get people to recognize, gender diverse, gender neutral? And I think, we're getting there. We're getting to a place, as I started at the beginning, I'm so happy we're at a place where, as an Indigenous woman, I can talk about my experience and I can share my story, and people are listening, and they don't have to be receptive to my thoughts and my beliefs. That's fine, but the fact they're listening, I think that's awareness, and that's what's important.
Absolutely. So, back a few weeks ago, I talked to Dr. Manju Verma. The first, you probably know Manju or know of Manju. Yeah. No doubt you probably know her. And we had a great conversation about, I guess, acceptance, recognition, and commitment. She called it ARC. And it's just like,
I remember that.
If we did ARC in all of our organizations, I think they would be better places. And what a powerful conversation about bias, unconscious bias, and those sorts of things. Because I think that as people, we need to unlearn some of the things that we've learned growing up and looking at shift and change. What are some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think you don't know who you are until you have to fight for it. It's easy to have standards and ethics when there's no cause. So you have to have a cause. And I think, that's important, because as a Mi'kmaq woman, I'm happy that we're talking about it, but I'm also have some concerns because there's so many that want to be Indigenous now and are professing when they're not, or they're paper Indians. They have a card and then they think they're, so my fear is that they're erasing us by replacing us. And, I've been in so many forums, particularly in Newfoundland on the island portion, not the Labrador portion, but, where people, and I know that there's a reclamation happening in this province. I know that, there have been people that didn't know they were Indigenous and didn't have the privileges that I had from an Indigenous perspective growing up in a Mi'kmaq community. But I get afraid when I hear people standing up and professing these stories that seem a little bit like something you would find online in the States, and not really. But then we're in a society where we have now people listening and people are jumping up to speak, but really shouldn't be speaking. So from someone who was Indian when Indian wasn't cool, I worry that we're losing a lot of credibility, like you can't get a status card in 2009 and say you're a founding member and then be a knowledge keeper. It doesn't work like that. But then how do you being the society, differentiate? So I think we have a lot of work to do within our Indigenous communities, because it's quite concerning, some of the things I see here.
Yeah, because I guess that goes back to potentially authenticity. Like, how authentic are people?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it done for the dollar value versus I'm trying to get in touch? Because I'm sure there are people who are trying to get in touch with their heritage and may have been moved out of communities and, all the things and horrific things that have happened in the past. Maybe, like there's, I guess, a whole bunch of different reasons. But, I always hope that people are doing things for authentic reasons, not otherwise.
I too, as a positive person, I always try to see the good that people are putting out. But I think a lot of times in people's haste to be, we seem like we have a sliding scale of who's the most Indigenous, and in this, and why we do that, I don't know if it's a human thing or a cultural thing, but, why we have to profess to be the best Indian or the better Indian, and by whose standards, like it's only mainstream society judging you. Like inside, to be an Indigenous person, you have to know who you are. You have to respect the environment, the land, and take care of each other. I mean, that's the principles of Mi'kmaq society, jumping up and saying, I'm a knowledge keeper and I'm, so-and-so. And I'm like, for one, you wouldn't jump up and say that. You would be acknowledged. But so I do have some concerns about our credibility and about in our haste to reclaim. I think we're losing a lot of our basis, our foundation of Indianness, of being a Mi'kmaq. So that's concerning, and I'm not sure how to address it. So that's something that is concerning. Still lots of work to be done. And I mean, so these are the people that, are what I call paper Indians. They have a card and then they claim to be something. And then you have the term people are using as pretend Indians. I don't like the term pretend Indians because it makes it sound like they're clever or cute, kids playing pretend. Mm-hmm. I like to call it what it is, fraud. It's fraud, period. End of story. And because again, where words matter, when we say pretend, it's hard to see harm there when actually mm-hmm. it's a lot of harm. So it's fraud.
Absolutely. So for someone like me, who's a settler of this land, and I always profess to be a settler, how can someone like me or others who are white settlers, how can we do better, and how can we, I guess, create partnerships with folks who are Indigenous?
And I think that's the thing, is you have to make relationships. You have to have relationships. Mm-hmm. You have to do some research. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit more challenging in Newfoundland. I readily admit that, because it's so varied in terms of, what even the Mi'kmaq community believes. So it's a bit more challenging, but I think it's the onus is on you as a settler and Canadian society at large mm-hmm. to find out who your First Peoples are in your community, in your neighborhood. And more often than not, I think people are genuinely open to sharing, who they are, what they are, and their beliefs. So that's it. And I think the other thing, that settlers may want to be conscious of is awareness that, we've had 500 years of history that, starting from the Royal Proclamation, which is the first piece of legislation that defined Indians and the relationship. It outlined the relationship between the Crown and Indians, and it had Indians as a government, as a nation, which is where we got the basis from to, there was an act in Canadian society called an Act for the Gradual Civilization of Indians. Like, this is your country. Your country had this law. And very few people know it was then changed to the Indian Act, which is what is governed now. So those are the things that we need to be aware of. And I think I always tell people, leave your white eyes behind, because when you look at communities, and it's so easy to judge and say, oh, well, these Indigenous communities, they just can't get it together. When you look at the laws and policy that's been created since settlers came here, they had an act to gradually civilize Indians. So from that act, if you got educated, you lost your status. If you married a white woman, she got status. But if you were an Indian woman and married a white man, you lost your status. And so your kids. So then we're now at a place where these people are coming back, but they've been disconnected. You also have a piece where kids that were taken out of the 60s scoop come back in the communities. And then you have the residential school survivors, who everyone is impacted, where I think everyone is aware of the atrocities that happened. So then you have all these people back in the community trying to connect when there has been so much disconnect. So there's a lot of work that has to be done within. But as you, as a settler looking in, I think you may not be aware of all these things that came into play that led us to this. So you judge, like, okay, you have money for education. How come not everyone's in school, you know? So I think that's one of the things I would caution people is, you know, try to leave your white eyes behind and understand, you know, residential school, its impacts, it's created generations and then intergenerational trauma. But these are the people that are our leaders and our elders. So it's challenging. It's challenging times. And I think it will be for a long time.
Absolutely. It's a whole lot to unpack in what you just said there. You know, like we have a massive history of atrocities, unfortunately, in Canada. And I do hope that, I guess, as time goes on, that, you know, the true passion for truth and reconciliation comes out with organizations and companies and people in general. And as you know, September is coming. And of course, every Indigenous organization gets that knock, and those thousands of emails saying like, hey, can I have a session? Can I have a training? Can I have a ask, right? Yeah. It's kind of like Pride Month. Like, you know, we're only queer one month of the year. It's similar, right? That similar sort of thing.
Absolutely. And that's not enough. Like, it's no good for a municipality to say, well, I had the first light in, now they gave me a training, I'm good to go. That's not enough, you know? And my famous pet peeve, well, I have two pet peeves, but the one that irks me the most is like, why can't they get over it? You know, why can't they just get over it? You know, I didn't do that to them. And I always quote Murray Sinclair, who was a senator, who was a commissioner for truth and reconciliation, who was a judge, and someone I'm privileged to say I know. And he always said, you know, when they say, why don't you get over it? Why don't you say, well, why don't you get over 9/11? You know, why don't you get over Veterans Day? You know, you have every year November 11th. Like, why don't you get over those things? And he was like, you should never get over it. You can't, we'll never get over it. And you should never forget what this country has done to its most vulnerable citizens. I mean, there's upwards of 10,000 kids that have not come home. And now they don't even report when the graves are found. You don't even
you don't see
that report.
No,
because
the numbers have stopped. The numbers haven't stopped, but they've stopped in public.
Exactly. Because it makes you look bad, right?
Well, I think our history is what it is. And I think, unfortunately, as Canadians, we like to think that we're better than other places, but we're not.
Nope.
We might have laws and more protections, to be honest, than what other places do, which I'm grateful for, just given my intersectionality, being a part of the queer community. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think we do have a history that needs to be, you know, widely looked at and through our school systems, because we didn't learn about things in our school systems that we should have. I mean, in my mid 40s, going to late 40s. But we didn't learn the things that we need to. And I think now we're starting to learn about our histories, and it's heavy when you start to, and it's somber, and it's just like, wow, like you're walking in very deep, dark waters is what it feels like when you start reading some of our history on those things. And it's really shattering, actually, when you start to look at it. So I get it. From my perspective, from that settler perspective, it's massive. So I guess for those listening, how do we try to move forward in a small baby step way?
I think, you know, I think being aware helps. Being aware of these things, you know, and there's lots of good work. There's a website, Truth and Reconciliation actually has their own website. A lot of these pieces of history is there and available. They have some wonderful presentations that I would certainly encourage people to look at. And I think once people become aware, then they're open to understanding. And I think that's where we'll make a difference, because, you know, it's the only way we're going to move forward. No one's going anywhere. You know, we're the First Peoples, and you're the settlers, and we've come this far. But I am very optimistic, and it took us 500 years to get here. I don't think it's going to take 500 years to get where we're going, because we are now in a place where we recognize that we need to get somewhere else.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So what do you think that we can do as communities to support Indigenous work, and to support, I guess, that baby step forward?
Well, I think become aware, become educated.
Okay.
Learn the pieces of legislation. Yeah. There's great resources. There's great books out there. And I know some people say, well, I don't want to read a book. Get an Audible book. I love them. I'm busy all the time. I love Audible books, and find out. And I think, the onus is on us, every Canadian, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because a lot of our communities aren't aware of how we got to where we are either. So I think the onus is on us to become aware, and awareness certainly breeds understanding. Not immediately, but I think it will.
So to summarize our session, I would think it'd be empathy, think about our relations that we have, awareness, understanding, and getting to know our history. And just, I guess, to me, it's call it be brave, have a look at how we're impacting one another when it comes to workplaces, when it comes to organizations, and utmost positivity, a smile, positivity, all those bright things. So I'm going to give the last words over to you.
Well, thank you. I can't believe I'm actually stuck for words, but for me, it's, listen to learn, and you can't learn anything when you're talking.
That's why we have one mouth and two ears, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. So if folks want to reach out to you or have questions for you and want to follow you in your fantastic career and what you're doing as a senator, how can they reach out and get connected with you?
I have an email, and I'm now public on LinkedIn. I'll be a couple of weeks before I have the social media platforms set up. So that's coming, but you can reach me at judy.white at sen-parl.gc.ca, or find me on LinkedIn. I really enjoy hearing from Canadians, and to hear from Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, I will be thrilled.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I truly have enjoyed our session today and your time. I'm truly grateful for that. And thanks everyone for listening to Be the Change podcast at Diversity NL. Thank you, and have a great day, Judy.
Lalio.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Comment below, subscribe, connect with me at Stephanie@diversitynl.com or on LinkedIn. Be the change.